I specifically told him not to mention that bottom 10 thing. But I want to say this. I do write the bottom 10 every week for ESPN.com. And Arkansas was on the list because we did a special Power 5 edition of the bottom 10 that week. The reason being that they're just an abnormally large amount of Power 5 schools that have been struggling this year. And I feel like I need to clarify also, up there on the bio it said I'm a University of Tennessee grad. I had Tennessee in there as well, which means that most of my in-laws and my college roommates and my wife refused to speak to me for like the next week. But it is what it is. I'm really excited to be here today. I was telling Zach last night, I've been to Fayetteville a lot of times, and somehow I've never covered a college football game here. I've been here for baseball games. I've been here for a track story. I was here because Baker Mayfield decided to have an interesting evening up the road here one day. I've been here for a lot of reasons. I've never covered a college football game here. I've covered Arkansas in Little Rock at that fine facility down there. I've covered Arkansas in bowl games. I've covered Arkansas. I live in Charlotte. I covered them in the Belk Bowl. It just feels like 10 minutes ago. I've covered Arkansas all over the country, but have not covered a game here. And SEC Nation, which is one of the shows that I'm fortunate enough to work on, will be here on Saturday. And literally while we're eating lunch, they texted and they go, hey, is there any way you could be in Fayetteville on Saturday to be on the show? I'm like, I'm in Fayetteville today. So my daughter will turn 14 on Friday night. So I'm going to stay home because all due respect to SEC Nation, right now my teenage daughter actually likes me. And I don't want to do anything to ruin that. But I grew up in the Carolinas. I live in Charlotte now. I've lived there 20 plus years. I was born in Rockingham, North Carolina. We're NASCAR fans. We have an empty racetrack there now. We lived in a little town called Shelby. Primarily grew up in Raleigh, which is a fantastic place to be if you are a college sports fan. I grew up there in the 80s, and the football there was not very good, but the basketball there was off the chart. That's when Jim Valvano was at NC State, and I unsuccessfully tried multiple times to ask his daughter out, and she continues to remind me that she is not interested. That's when Mike Krzyzewski had just started at Duke, when Dean Smith was at the height of his powers in North Carolina. I mean, it was a great time as a teenager to grow up in the Carolinas. My father, and this is why I became a college football fanatic, my father was a college football official, a downfield official, a field judge, a side judge for more than 40 years. His first Division I game was in 1981, and his last Division I game, what we call FBS now, was the national championship game between Florida and Oklahoma in January 2009. That is a really unique way to learn about football, is going to games and listening to your father be screamed at for a couple hours. That's where I learned how to curse, is listening to people describing how my father was doing his job on the field. Because of my dad's time on the field as an official, and because of a lot of other reasons, even though I've never lived in Arkansas, I've always kind of had this connection and kind of fondness for Arkansas football. I mentioned Shelby, North Carolina. We lived there when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and our closest friends were from Little Rock, and they met here on the campus at Arkansas. So as a little kid, we would go have dinner at their house, play with their kids, whatever, and there was one wall in the house I just remember covered in Arkansas stuff, and there was one centerpiece painting of the old school 1970s, all I saw was a running hog. And I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And he's got fangs. That's what I'm thinking, when I'm a kid. Like, that's the coolest thing. So I kind of started paying attention to Arkansas football as a little kid, just simply because of this cartoon pig that was on the wall of our friend's house. My father, as I mentioned, was a college football official. He worked several games with Arkansas. I texted him last night. His stories are off the chart. And we were having dinner last night. I texted Dad, I go, all right, how many times did you work Arkansas games? And I knew that he had, because we had one wall in the house that was covered with pennants, with banners of every team that he had ever worked a game. He worked a game here in Fayetteville. His last time he worked Arkansas, and I'm going to read the text. I said, Dad, when's the last time you worked an Arkansas game? And he says, the 2008 Cotton Bowl, Reggie Herring was the acting coach. The most important thing is the night before the game, your stepmother and I went dancing with Frank Broyles. And Grant Taft was there, of course, was the coach at Baylor forever. He says, ugly game, but the Arkansas crowd was great. Frank Broyles was a dancing machine. And I texted him back. I said, would you mind if I tell that story? And he goes, no, please do. Seriously. He was a dancing machine. I got tired and sat down. So did Grant Taft. So Coach Broyles was happy to dance with everyone's wives. And I said, Dad, are you sure he would have been 84 that night? And my dad responded, but on the dance floor, he was 22. I went to school at the University of Tennessee. Johnny Majors was the head coach there. I was fortunate enough to work for the football team as a member of the video crew, the film crew. And every single day of practice for 3 years, my sophomore through my senior year, I was on the tower at practice and had Johnny Majors on the tower with me. It was just the two of us. And you talk about story time. And Johnny Majors, as some of you may know, was an assistant coach here under Frank Broyles, 1964 through 67, which was a really good time to be on the staff at Arkansas. And let me tell you something. Coach Majors, to this day, special teams guy. He's a defensive backs and special teams guy. If he told me the story one more time about Kenny Hatfield, now 81-yard punt return against Texas, the greatest punt return anybody ever saw. He told me that story. I'm not lying. In the course of 3 years, he might have told me this 40 times. Well, my freshman year, Tennessee played Arkansas in the Cotton Bowl, which was not a fortunate outcome for Arkansas, but what a phenomenal football game. People forget about that game in the old Cotton Bowl on the AstroTurf, and I got a chance to meet Ken Hatfield there. I will always love Ken Hatfield because he gifted me one of the greatest fan moments that I ever had. I grew up in Raleigh. I grew up a North Carolina State fan. In the middle of my junior year in high school, we moved to Greenville, South Carolina, which is an awesome town now. In 1987, it was a dump. Well, all anyone wants to talk about in upstate South Carolina is Clemson football, Clemson football, Clemson football. And I was an NC State guy. And NC State and Clemson, they just played a couple weekends ago in what they call the Textile Bowl. They don't like each other very much. And so me, every day at school, and let me say something, if you can walk into a high school cafeteria as a junior with your tray and not know anyone, everything else in life is a piece of cake. And so I walk into the cafeteria, got all my NC State stuff on. That's not how you make friends in upstate South Carolina. But Ken Hatfield had me one of the greatest moments of my life because I was sitting with my best friend from high school who was a South Carolina Gamecock, and we're sitting on the top row of the end zone grandstand for the Textile Bowl for NC State and Clemson. Ken Hatfield's first year at Clemson, and it hasn't gone really well at this point. And he's kind of starting to lose the fan base. Well, we're sitting on the top row of this grandstand, and everybody knows about Clemson running down the hill. And it's one of the great interests in college football. What a lot of people don't know is the locker room is actually on the other end of the stadium. So the team will come out, get on buses, and drive around to the other end of the stadium and run down the hill. Well, they really like their orange at Clemson, and they really like it when they wear all orange with the orange pants and the whole thing. They've never worn anything else. White on the road, orange at home, that's it. Well, not a lot of people know that Clemson's third color is purple. And sometimes they'll trim the basketball uniforms in it. Sometimes the women's programs will wear it, but it's a third color. It's an official color. They just never use it. Well, my buddy and I are sitting on the top row of this thing, and we see Clemson kind of sneaking out of the locker room and getting on the bus, and they got on purple jerseys. And it is packed to the gills in Death Valley, and I'm like, man, this is going to be awesome. And so they drive around to the top of the hill. We realize no one else has seen this. And the team gets to the top of the hill, and the crowd's going crazy, and the balloons are ready to go, and it's a huge game, ranked teams. And when they hit the top of that hill and had those purple jerseys on, we had 3 old guys sitting right in front of us, had on orange overalls. And they were so mad and got so red in the face and immediately started pointing at us, where's Ken Hatfield? Where's Ken Hatfield? He got these boys in these purple jerseys. Well, my father worked at Furman University, the Purple Paladins. And they were really good at 1AA, what we call FCS now. As Clemson runs down the hill onto the field, the stadium realizes they're wearing these purple jerseys, and it falls completely silent. They have no idea what to do. They have managed to throw a big old bucket of cold water on the greatest interest in college football. And I lean up to those three guys sitting in front of me. I go, man, they're going to be mad at Furman. And the guy goes, why are they going to be mad at Furman? I said, because y'all stole those purple jerseys and you got them on down here to play NC State. And that guy turned around and he took a swing at me and we laughed. And I will always be grateful to Kenny Hatfield for handing me that moment. It was one of the great. But Johnny Majors used to tell me about his time in Fayetteville. And there are some stories that I'm not going to tell you here today because they are completely inappropriate. But he did tell me that Kenny Hatfield was the greatest punt returner that he'd ever seen, that he'll ever coach. And he also told me that Jerry Jones was the biggest pain in the butt that he'd ever been around. And then he told me Jimmy Johnson was even bigger pain in the butt. And then he said, and Barry Switzer enabled those little jerks. And every time we tried to do something, hey, y'all sit down and be quiet. Barry Switzer was like, that's all right, we'll go out later. These are the stories that I grew up hearing about Arkansas football with Johnny Majors. And so I mentioned Clemson. Danny Ford, of course, was the coach at Clemson when we first moved there in the 80s, and they were rolling, and they just won a national championship a few years earlier when we moved there. Well, as a student at Tennessee, we had a really ugly year in 1992, which was my senior year at Tennessee, and Coach Majors had a heart attack, and he missed a few games, and I'm not going to get into all this, but basically he was going to be fired. They needed an excuse to do it. Well, Coach Majors came back from his heart attack, first came back on the sideline as head coach, had Arkansas coming into town. Tennessee's number 4 in the country at this point. Y'all remember this game. Well, I learned with my father officiating all those games in the ACC and all those games I attended at Clemson. Danny Ford, when he had you, there was this one pose that he had, and if he knew they were about to win, he'd do this deal here. He'd crouch down and reach back and get Red Man and put in a plug right before the play that won the game. And everybody in the ACC, when they saw Danny Ford take that pose, they'd go, oh, man, here we go. Well, I'm a student on the video crew at Tennessee. I'm in the end zone. The game has not gone well for Tennessee. They're still leading in the closing seconds of the game. And I will never forget standing way up there in the end zone on the top row, and I got my video camera, and I zoomed in on Danny Ford, and Arkansas is trotting out the kicking unit. And I look over there, and there he is. And I looked at the guy I was working with. I said, oh, man. I know this look. And sure enough, they kicked a field goal, and they broke our hearts. And within a month, Johnny Majors was out. They lost the next 3 games. But Arkansas football is just, I've always enjoyed it. I've always thought it was one of the most fantastic fan bases in college football. And that even goes for the games when my father has officiated. I mentioned being the son of a college football official. When that happens, when you are fortunate enough to go to football games, you do learn how to cuss, you do learn how to insult, you do learn to have a thick skin. Because what happens is the officials, as you can imagine, they're giving tickets to the game for their families. They are not the best tickets in the stadium. You are typically sitting with a group of people who look like they've slept under the grandstands that night with a lot of amber liquids. And you're sitting with them during the game. So my brother and I, when my father first started officiating big-time college football, I'm about 12. My brother's about 9. My brother was so cute. He looked like the kid from E.T. If you're familiar with that movie. He was the cutest kid ever. Now he's way bigger than I am. At the time, he was a little bitty guy. Well, we kind of figured out after a while that there was a routine to this when we go to football games. And we would sit there in the cheap seats, with the rough locals, and there would always be one guy. And he was all lathered up, and he would always be the guy that decided he's the guy that's going to yell at the officials. And as soon as the game would start, as soon as the officials would come out of the tunnel for the pregame, y'all ought to wear glasses, and you get your rule book at Kmart. And of course, I'm cleaning this up for you. But it was just, Well, we would always identify the one guy, and it was like fishing. We would hook him, and we'd let him run with that line for about a quarter and a half. And every single time there's any flag thrown, every single time there's any close call, he'd always stand up, and you could always see, no matter what stadium we were in, he starts feeling it. And he's like a stand-up comedian. He starts feeding off the crowd a little bit. Like, all right, they think I'm the man. I'm the guy. This and that, and you zebras, and so and so and so and so. And usually about halfway through the second quarter, he would stand up, no matter what stadium we're in, and he'd start to say something, and right on cue, my brother and I would stand up. And I would go, hey! And everybody would turn and look at us, and I'd say, quit yelling at our dad. And my brother would do this right here. He'd go. And for the rest of the game, no matter what stadium we were in, anytime there was any call, a guy would start to jump up, and he'd look over at us, and we'd be like, And he sit back down. So that's what you learn as the son of an official. So let me give you a picture. So what you learn as the son of a college football official is there's 3 teams on the field. There's the 2 teams that are competing, and then there are the 7, now 8 officials that are on the field. When I was a kid, it was 5 and 6 officials. But they work so hard. They all have other jobs. They're usually the smartest people in the stadium. My dad was a university president for years. His crew, it was a university president. It was a Pulitzer Prize winning history professor from the University of Virginia. It was a billionaire software entrepreneur and 2 FBI agents and a first responder to 9/11 at the Pentagon. I mean, these are the guys that were on my dad's crew forever. And meanwhile, they're getting yelled at by some guy who hadn't had a job in 10 years is sitting on the top row of the stadium. You idiot! But that's what I learned to deal with. But growing up, how I learned football was my father would get the new rule book every spring. And my brother and I are in the swimming pool, and my dad is studying. And he's got his job during the week, and on the weekends, he's got that rule book out and he's studying. Every Monday night, they'd have a meeting of all the officials that lived in the area, and they're taking tests, and they're going down to clinics, and they're doing all this. I mean, it was a job, and they do it because they love it. They didn't make any money, made a couple $100 a game. They usually would lose money on travel, but they did it because they genuinely loved it. But the way I learned football was, all right, I'm 14 years old, and my brother's 11, and Dad gets a new rule book, and he goes, all right, we got a new halo rule this year on punt returns. Let me explain it to you. And so he's moving furniture around. And in the den, he's like, all right, Ryan, you're the receiver. Sam, that's my little brother, goes, you're the defender, you're the one on rushing. He grabs my mom. All right, Hannah, you're going to do so-and-so and so-and-so. And the Ottoman is the offensive tackle. I mean, and this is our den. We got it all laid out. And that's how we would learn football, was him explaining rules. I received my first credential on the sideline when I was 12 years old. It was a game North Carolina at Virginia. My dad realized real quickly I love photography, and he got a photographer's pass for me for a game in Charlottesville, Virginia. It actually was a huge football game at the time. The good news is I took a spectacular picture with my camera that Santa Claus had just brought to me the year before on the sideline of a guy named Barry Word scoring the game-winning touchdown, cutting over the pylon. The bad news is if you see this picture, which is actually still in my office in Charlotte, you see the linebacker, Micah Moon, the man who replaced Lawrence Taylor as the star on that defense at North Carolina. You see him in the back, way behind the play. He's not going to make the tackle in time. Well, he didn't tackle Barry Word. He tackled me. I was 12 years old. This was live on Jefferson Pilot. I mean, it was a yard sale. He hit me so hard that all my camera equipment's flying all over the place. There was like a Snickers bar in my pocket. I mean, everything. I ripped my shirt. And everybody runs over, are you okay? The team doctor from Virginia, and I thought it was the greatest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. Just a couple of weeks later, I had my second college football credential. I was game, and this is a terrible game, Maryland at Duke, at Wallace Wade Stadium, one of the most beautiful places to watch terrible football, although they're good now. They go to a bowl game every year, but back then in the 80s, they were awful. I had a credential on the sideline. And I was very fortunate that a couple of older photographers from the local papers kind of took me under their wing. They realized very quickly I didn't know what I was doing. Just turned 13, I think, and we're on the sideline watching the game. Miss North Carolina is there, and she walks over and introduces herself to me. At halftime, one of the photographers goes, come on with me. And we walk up through the grandstand, and we go up in the press box, and they gave us a hot dog and a barbecue sandwich and a Pepsi and a cookie. And Miss North Carolina comes walking through again. Are you guys having a great time? Yes, I'm having a fantastic time. We watched the band, and then we walked back down for the second half. They had a great finish to the game, and I was like, I looked at the photographer and I go, are they paying you to be here to do this today? And he goes, yes. And I'm like, I have to figure out how to do this. And that's exactly my goal from that point was I have to figure out a way to get paid to be in the press box. And so that's how I learned football. I learned football through my father. I learned football standing on the sideline when he worked his last game, the national championship game in 2009 with Oklahoma and Florida. There I was standing on the sideline talking with my father just like I was doing when I was 12 and 13 years old. And it was the greatest gift, and that's why we love college football so much. But that's how I learned the game, and that is absolutely how I learned to curse. Was listening to that. But it is interesting, and I think as I've become a writer at ESPN and covering college football, I don't defend officials just to do it, but I do see it as part of my job to explain why officials do what they do and how they do their job, and the fact that they are just out there because they love it. And I argue a lot of times with a lot of our other analysts who are former players because they don't necessarily want to hear that. But I think that once you get them in a room, and I think the ESPN has done a really nice job the last few years over incorporating officials into these games and doing analysis. We don't all have to agree on the rules. I'm not going to get into a targeting debate today because I think we all have our issues with it, and that includes the officials as well. But that is how I learned the game, and I'll always be thankful to my father for that. You mentioned the Dale Earnhardt Jr. book. I'm trying to talk my agent into letting my dad write a book with me with all his stories from the sideline. We were talking about this last night. Lou Holtz. Dad has the Orange Bowl. Biggest game in his career at this point. And my brother, this is the 1990 Orange Bowl, and this is against Colorado for the national championship. This is not the game where Rocket Ismail was called back because of a clip, because my dad has sworn him down he would have never called that. But this is a fantastic game. Colorado was number 1. Notre Dame was like number 4 or 5, ended up winning the game. It was Lou Holtz and all that. Dad tells 2 stories about that game. Prior to the game, the day before, they have the logistics meeting. Yeah, all right, so it's both teams, Colorado and Notre Dame, reps from both teams. It's NBC Sports. O.J. Simpson's there, sideline reporter, which was a really big deal for a lot of different reasons in 1990. But everybody's sitting in the locker room going over, all right, this is how this is going to work, and this is a pregame, and so-and-so singing the national anthem, and da-da-da-da-da. Anybody have any questions? And it's pretty routine. Everybody's like, no, we're good. And as everybody starts to leave, Lou Holtz, he says, I got a question. This is what he goes, how does this work with this damn buffalo? Everyone's like, what? He's like, how does this work with this buffalo? And for those of you who don't know, Colorado has a gigantic buffalo that weighs a couple thousand pounds that runs 35 miles an hour out onto the field. And Lou Holtz goes, I need to know what the deal is with the buffalo. And everybody thinks he's joking because it's Coach Holtz, and he's a funny guy. And he goes, I am not joking. I do not need Michael Stonebreaker and Chris Sorich to get run over by a buffalo and not play for the national championship. And so they explained to him, all right, this is what Ralphie does and this is how that works. Well, before the game, and this is where I became a Lou Holtz fan. Lou Holtz never met my father. My father never officiated a game Lou Holtz coached in. And prior to the game, Dad was standing with a guy named Bill Bookers. His best friend was a high school teacher from Lynchburg, Virginia. The two of them are standing on the sideline for the pregame. Lou Holtz walks up, puts his arm around my dad, and he goes, Jerry, how's everything at Furman? And Dad's like, it's good. And he's like, I heard you had a big fundraising campaign. Is it going pretty well? Dad's like, yeah, Coach. And Holtz turns Dad around to the grandstand. He goes, are Hannah and Ryan and Sam here today? Where are they sitting? And Coach had researched all of that. And that's when I realized there's an entirely different level to what those guys do. Now, I'll say this. It didn't stop Dad from calling pass interference against Notre Dame in the third, fourth quarter. And speaking of pass interference, Dad worked at Rose Bowl one year. It was Ohio State, Arizona State. Arizona State got a chance to win the national championship. Jake Plummer, Jake the Snake, was the quarterback. Ohio State came into the game ranked but didn't have a chance for the national championship. Arizona State scores on a phenomenal sprinting touchdown run by Jake the Snake Plummer. For those of y'all who don't remember him, he was kind of a Baker Mayfield kind of guy, snaking around. They call him the Snake because he would these unbelievable runs. I just saw Kyler Murray Saturday night for Oklahoma, reminded me a lot of Jake the Snake, just smaller. Well, the Snake scores. There's still about a minute and a half left to go in the game. Arizona State makes a terrible move and decides to come back with a pooch kick kickoff. Well, that sets Ohio State up in midfield. Ohio State, there are 3 pass interference calls against Arizona State on the next drive. And Dad had 2 of those flags. And it's pretty obvious. When my dad called pass interference, we always said he threw it into a pool of blood. Like there was no question. It was absolutely pass interference. Well, Ohio State scores, they win a Rose Bowl. Fast forward 10 years later, I was working for NASCAR. I worked for NASCAR Productions, which is kind of NFL films and race cars. The guy whose office was next door to me was our lead sales guy, Jake Plummer's best friend. They were in each other's weddings, and Plummer's playing in Denver at this point. And Jake Plummer comes walking into the office one day, the Snake. And my buddy walks over to my office, and they walk in, and I stand up, and I say, hey, man, I was at the Rose Bowl. He goes, yeah, that was a tough one. He goes, hey, you know what? I said, my dad was officiating in that game. Let's call him on the phone. He'd love to talk to you. Great. So I called Dad. I put him on speakerphone. Hey, Dad, I got Jake Plummer on the phone. And my dad, not knowing that he's on speakerphone, I think, goes, did you tell him I had those 2 flags against Arizona State on that last drive in the Rose Bowl? And Jake Plummer says, screw you, and walked over and hit the phone and hung up. So that's what it's like when you grow up the son of a college football official. But in my job now, and I'm very fortunate that he mentioned Marty McGee. Marty Smith has been a friend of mine for 20 years. Marty and I worked a NASCAR beat together forever, and now we get to host we're on the SEC network every Thursday night. We'll be on tomorrow night, I guess 6 o'clock here, and we get to tell these stories, and we get to experience these things together, and I say it all the time that if you can get screamed at just for being related to someone at college football games, then you certainly can learn how to enjoy it. But I'm very fortunate I get to do what I get to do. I'm very fortunate to be in Fayetteville today, and I want to say this too. So I mentioned I write the bottom 10. And what that means is over the last 10 years, and I want to say the bottom 10 is not mean. When we write the bottom 10, we never mention specific players' names. We never pick on individual kids. It's just kind of fun. And the most surprising thing for me since I took over the bottom 10 7-8 years ago is how much fun the schools will have with you. When Georgia State, they were my inaugural bottom 10 champions when I first took it over 6-7 years ago. When the season was over with, they sent me a care package full of Georgia State stuff, and they said, thanks, man. Nobody else in the nation wrote anything about us. UTEP this past weekend snapped a 20-game losing streak when they won at Rice. And the athletic director from UTEP sent word to me, thank you for the fun and games. Can we please not be on the list for 1 week now that we finally did this? But the most rewarding thing about the bottom 10 for me is when I do watch a team that has been so bad for so long, and then when they turn the corner. And I tell you all of that to tell you this. I have watched so much SMU football over the last 7-8 years. And when Chad Morris got the job at Arkansas, I was on Bo's radio show, and I immediately said, I don't want to hear anybody talk about his win-loss record at SMU. Because if you really paid attention to what he did there, and I did, they were so abysmally awful when he took that job. The fact that he got them to a bowl game in that last year, and honestly, they should have been in a bowl game those last 2 years there, for him to have won anything down there, and for him to create any sort of electricity in that building down there, which is it's a beautiful stadium when it's empty, which it is most of the time. But it feels like an emergency room when you go to a game there. It's just bland and it's sterile, and he changed all of that. So when he was hired here, I was the first one to go on Bo's show and say, if everybody's willing to hang on and let him do what he needs to do, I really believe that it could be something special, because I like him. I was talking to Coach about the fact that he takes his role as a high school coach. Guy was in high school, feels like 10 minutes ago. He takes his role as a mentor to high school coaches so seriously. I talked to him about this back in July at SEC Media Days. And Gus Malzahn the same way. Those guys, they know. But those guys were on the high school sideline 15 minutes ago, and now they're on the biggest stages possible. So I like him a lot as a person. I like him a lot as a football coach. And I think if everybody's willing to, listen, I'm a Tennessee alum, man. I don't have to tell you about unreasonable expectations. Our fan base has done a great job of distinguishing itself over the last 10 years. But if you're willing to dig in and you're willing to give it just a little bit of patience, I really believe that he has a chance to build something special. I appreciate y'all having me. I think we're going to take some questions. Yeah, has anybody got, that was my spiel. Anybody any questions? Yes, sir.
Alabama runs the table. Where do you think they rank all time in college football?
Well, first of all, I think the Saban versus Bear Bryant debate's over. I wrote that column last year, regardless of whatever they did. I think that what Saban has done in the era that he's done it is the most stunning thing I've seen. I just wrote a column 2 weeks ago about Alabama and LSU, and a lot of people don't realize this, but Bear Bryant has such a control over the SEC. He basically determined who your recruits are going to be and who your coaching hires are going to be. If he called Charlie McClendon at LSU and said, hey, I don't want this quarterback, I think he fit in really well for you guys, Charlie McClendon, who played for Bear Bryant, would just take the kid. Well, guess what? Bear Bryant didn't send him a great one, he sent him a pretty good one, But everything with the parity we have in college football, everybody's got so much money. What they're doing is crazy. But if they run the table this year, and if they keep winning like they're winning, if they continue to do to whoever they see in the playoff, and if they beat Georgia like they beat LSU, and then they go to the playoff and do the same thing, then we're going to have a serious discussion about greatest team of all time. You know, when you look back on teams like some of those Miami teams in the late 80s, early 90s, the 64 Arkansas team, you know, some of those teams that came out of Alabama under Bear Bryant, you know, you need some historical perspective. You know, I mentioned the Rose Bowl. Dad had the Rose Bowl with USC and Michigan one year. That USC team, that was Reggie Bush and Leinart and those guys. And history helps us frame it up, but my initial reaction is going to be, we need to have a serious discussion about best team of all time, because what they're doing on offense is bonkers. And it was like an hour ago that Saban was like, spread offenses are terrible and hurry up and it's going to destroy football. And then he realized, we were writing columns 5 years ago about Saban losing the handle on offensive football, and now and I keep waiting on Tua to be bad. And it ain't happened. I mean, I saw Kyler Murray on Saturday night, and he's really, really good. I think any other year we'd be talking about him and nobody else. But Tua is just, I kept thinking some of it was luck, but he just is good, man. And LSU popped him a couple of times, and he just, whatever, man. So, yeah, I think absolutely that it'd be in a discussion of the greatest team of all time. Yes, ma'am.
Why was the broadcast media kind of in a twist over James Carville's conspiracy theory about Alabama?
All right, so full disclosure, I was on an airplane going to Lubbock on Saturday when game day was on.
Okay.
So I did not, so by the time I get to the press box at Texas Tech, everybody's grabbing me going, hey, James Carville and ESPN or whatever. I deal with the conspiracy theory thing all the time because everybody thinks, and again, I mentioned I'm a Tennessee, alum, and my wife's from Knoxville and all that stuff. So I hear about everything set up for Alabama all the time. But here's what I find when I'm on the road. Everybody in the Big 12 thinks everything's set up for Texas. Everybody in the Pac-12 thinks everything's set up for USC. Everybody in the Big 10 thinks everything's set up for Ohio State. There's always one. It doesn't matter. When my dad was at Furman and Furman was in the Southern Conference, everybody thought everything was set up for Georgia Southern. There's always one, and so there's no merit to it. I mean, right now it's just frustrating for everybody because Alabama's just beating them. And like I said, I wrote a column last week about LSU's obsession with Alabama, and that's certainly not an exclusive thing to LSU. But over the last 15 years, I mean, LSU was the best team in the conference until Saban came back. And they haven't beaten him since. And so I think that, and then when they did beat him, they still had to play him in the national championship and got beaten again. So I get where the frustration comes from, but it's and the fact that it was Carville and it was, and he's a political figure and all that, I think contributed to it. I don't do politics. In fact, that was the one, I told Zach, I said, the one rule, I'm so glad I'm doing this today instead of yesterday. Because I don't talk about politics to my family, let alone anybody else. So I don't think when I'm a sports writer, so I don't go down that road. When politics bleed over into sports, like if we had a law in North Carolina that ran off all the NCAA events, and that's a news story. I'm covering that, but y'all will never know who I voted for. Yes, sir.
Kelly Bryant, where do you think he's going to go?
I don't know. I like Kelly Bryant a lot. I think when he gets older, he's going to wish he had handled his exit a little bit better than he did. I think Dabo's probably going to wish he'd handled a little better than he did too. I know the Clemson fan base is going to wish they had handled it better than they did. The good news for them is they had other stuff to talk about pretty quick. It's been fun watching this tour now. This is because free agencies, that's what we have now. We have free agency in college football. We do, with the transfer rules. And the coaches, people don't realize this, talking about Dad is an official. The coaches wrote the targeting rule. People don't realize that. Everybody likes to complain about, the coaches complain about this rule and that rule. They wrote those rules. Those rules are written in a room with a bunch of coaches in a rules committee, and then they're approved and they go through different committees and all that. But the initial rule is written as that, and the transfer rule is the same way. I can't believe no one sat in that room and went, well, now, wait a minute. The coaches were immediately thinking how beneficial it would be for them. But they weren't thinking about how, they're creating a free agency. It's an after 4-week free agency, which is it is. But the answer is I don't have any idea, but I would love for him to be here. I think that, and I know how he feels about Coach Morris. So I would love to see see that happen. But I think that the problem with that free agency though is that I covered Russell Wilson at NC State, And he was kind of the first high-profile grad transfer guy, who, by the way, is still not too short. All these NFL guys, when Russell Wilson, Baker Mayfield, Dak Prescott, we were just talking about this, while all these guys were coming out of school, these NFL guys that never watched college, around the draft, they come to me, guys, this guy's too short now. I'm like, okay. I always go back to Russell Wilson because I've covered Russ at NC State, I covered him in Wisconsin, I covered him minor league baseball with the Asheville Tourists. And but I remember talking to Russ about when it was time to transfer, and he's like, I'm going somewhere I can win. And he knew Wisconsin was this close to the Rose Bowl. So the timing isn't great for Arkansas if they wanted, but man, I would love to see it. I'd love to get him in the SEC. I think it'd be fantastic. Yes, sir.
How much fun is it working with Marty Smith?
Marty's probably going to see this. I'm going to say it's awesome. No, Marty's great. So Marty Smith, we started this little podcast 5 years ago. He and I covered NASCAR together forever. I used to be a television producer, and my claim to infamy is that I was the first producer to call Marty and go, "I'm going to put you on. I'd like to put you on TV," because we needed like an insider guy. I used to produce a show for Fox Sports Net, and he was on that. And but no, Marty's one of my best friends in the world. There have been a lot of TV shows. We see it on the morning news shows where they try to create chemistry when there's no chemistry there. And Marty and I just have it because we're friends. You can't fake that. And so, yeah, it's great working with Marty. I was telling Zach, the only issue I have with Marty is all those years that we traveled together to racetrack, my job was to take Marty's pictures with people because he's very distinctive with his Woody Woodpecker frohawk thing that he has going on. And I look like just any, whatever 40-something-year-old dude with glasses. And so when we're at the racetrack or whatever, it was like, "Hey, Marty, can I get a picture?" "Yeah." And then they go, "You mind taking my picture with Marty?" And what they don't know is every time I do it, I hit the selfie button first, and I go, and then I take a second picture, which is then with Marty. And I take like 8 of those. That way, they check the picture, it looks great. And then when they get home, they scroll back, and there's 8 pictures of them with Marty, and then their 9th picture of me, like that. But no, Marty's great. And we honestly, we do our TV show on Thursdays. We'll do it tomorrow night, 7 o'clock Eastern on SEC, and we hit the parking lot afterwards and we look at each other and go, "Can you believe that they're letting us do this?" It's that same feeling I had, on the sideline as a 13-year-old, which is awesome. Yes, sir.
When the long college football season's finally over, what is your primary job then? Just active writing?
Yeah, so it's changed a little bit. I'm a college basketball writer now. Last year was the first year that I had covered tournaments, but last year was the first year, so there used to be kind of a rhythm to my year. I would, the college football playoff national championship game or BCS national championship game, and then I would have a few weeks, and then I would go to Daytona for the Daytona 500. So my wife kind of got used to, all right, I got you at home for about 5-6 weeks. And last year, I think the college football championship had been over with in an hour, and my college sports boss at ESPN.com was like, "We really need you to be at Duke Syracuse like Thursday." But that's great. I'm not complaining, but there's not any time off anymore, which is fine. But my time off really is in the summertime. I usually go to the College World Series, not for the whole 2 weeks, but usually for one weekend. And usually between College World Series and SEC Media Days, I got about a month. I'll go to the beach and go hang out. But yeah, so to answer your question, I'll cover college basketball. I'll go to Daytona for the Daytona 500. Then we'll have the NCAA basketball tournament, and then I'll crash into the Indy 500, and then the College World Series. So it's not bad. I'm not complaining. But there are times when I do want to just go down in my basement and take a nap. Yes, sir.
Coach Morris stories to tell.
Coach Morris stories. So we recorded these TV shows. We did Marty McGee. Our pilot episode was at SEC Media Days. We did these. We called it Talking Season, and we did sit-down interviews with all 14 SEC coaches. And I knew Coach Morris from SMU. Didn't know him, but I covered him and certainly talked to him, and was crazy about him. I was crazy about him just simply based on the Friday night Twitter follow of the up-tempo chopper or whatever it was, where they did the recruiting. You guys all know he does it now. Was it called the air hog or whatever it is? And but just his energy level. And I'd known him a little bit at Clemson. But our SEC network producers really didn't know anything about him. And so they kind of came to us with a list, like, all right, these are the 14 coaches. We kind of feel like this is where they're going to rank as far as how the interviews go. And obviously Saban was number one, whether he's a good interview or not. And Marty and Saban are pretty tight. I say they're dating, but I'll leave that up. But the guys that were kind of at the bottom of the list were like Barry Odom at Missouri, Coach Morris, Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee, just based on our producers didn't think they were going to be. And I told them, I go, you're wrong on Morris. You're 100% wrong on Morris. And so we did the 14 interviews, and they brought us a revised list. And it was ranked from 1 to 14. Pruitt was still number 14. No one had any problem with that. But Morris and Barry Odom both had jumped almost to the top of the list. He was unbelievable. And so we asked a question of all the coaches on our radio show we threw out there. Hey, we're going to SEC Media Days. What's the one question you want to ask the coaches? And we had a caller from Texas, and he goes, biscuits or cornbread? I was like, that's genius. And so we asked all the coaches. We asked them about football and their background or whatever, and then you get to the end, all right, coach, this is the most important question you can get all day, biscuits or cornbread? And I will never forget how serious Chad Morris was about that. Like just sitting there and thinking about it. And finally he goes, biscuits. He goes, biscuits. And we're like, why? And what he said, you know, a good biscuit is like a good 5-star recruit. He's like, what you're looking for is you're looking for consistency and versatility. He goes, cornbread is just cornbread. He goes, cornbread's great. He goes, don't get me wrong, cornbread's great. He goes, but a biscuit, and he went into this, I mean, it was like a painting. He got right red in the face and glowing. You know how he gets when he really starts rolling, he kind of gets this shiny kind of glow to him, you know, like, how about Ryan, you know? And he started talking about, you know, you get the biscuit and your thing, he goes, you can put anything on a biscuit. He goes, you can put jelly on a biscuit. He goes, you put butter on it. He goes, he can sprinkle a little flour on there. And he pauses, he's like, oh, son. We're like, oh, coach, do you need a moment? Are you all right? The only other coach that had that kind of passion was Coach Ogeron, but we have no idea what he said. He said, I think he said like corn biscuit. I'm not sure what he said. But the thing about Ogeron is you always know his punctuation is always the same. He always ends up with "Go Tigers." He goes, "Go Tigers." So I went to the LSU Georgia game, and my job after the game was to interview Coach O for SportsCenter. And so CBS is televising the game, and you know everybody's rushed the field, and CBS interviews Coach O, and then LSU Radio interviews Coach O, and then Coach O comes to me, and the people are all the students are surrounding us, and they're chanting, "We want Bama, we want Bama, we want Bama," and Coach goes. Coach does the interview with me. I have no idea what he said. He said, and then he slapped me on the shoulder. He goes, "Go Tigers." And then he turns around and he goes, "Y'all shut up with the Bama." He goes, "We got to beat Mississippi State." And he's like, "Go Tigers," and runs off. So I love Coach. The good news is he didn't take his shirt off. That thing, him taking his shirt off, that's great. But no, but my all-time favorite, Morris will never do anything that tops. I mean, it was almost inappropriate with him talking about biscuits. Just drooling. I was like, all right, Coach. Yeah, versatility and consistency. Yeah, like a good 5-star. Got any questions? Yes, sir.
What's the greatest sporting event you've attended?
Oh, man. Greatest sporting event I've attended. That's a great question. I had the reason I wrote this worst-selling book about the College World Series. I had such a passion for Rosenblatt Stadium, and the last run scored, Jackie Bradley Jr., who was just hero of the World Series, he scored. But the greatest sporting event I've ever attended, there's nothing that tops the pre-race at the Indianapolis 500. It is constant chill bumps. And I've always told everybody that I don't care, I haven't been to the Kentucky Derby, but we all have that bucket list, right, that you want to go to. But if you get a chance, before your sporting life is over with, go to Indianapolis, get there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and stay until the end of the race. Because even if you don't care a thing about auto racing, I tell people people travel from all over the world for that. And that's for me personally, that's a moment in an event that I can't. It's hard to describe. Now I'll say this: college football wise, I was at the I was at the Louisville Clemson game 2 years ago. It was a shootout between those two quarterbacks, and but the loudest stadium I've ever been in was at LSU when they lost to Alabama 2 years ago. It's the only place I've been where I had to put my fingers in my ears like I was at the Daytona 500. It was the only time. There's a kind of a top end, like almost like a hurt in your eardrum when it gets that loud, and that was standing on the sideline for that game. But yeah, but Indy 500, you're never gonna get me. I always tell her, if you're an American, you got to go to that thing, even if you don't care a thing about auto racing, which a lot of people don't anymore. But there's 400,000 people there. Any more? Is Zach giving the walk off? I'm not looking at him. Is he walking up here? He's like, you got to wrap it up. It's like when you're in the award show and you go da 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 da. You just keep talking. If I just don't look at it, I get to stay up here because I'm having too much fun. I'm like Coach Morris with a biscuit right now. It's too good. Well, hey, listen, thank y'all so much, and I hope you have me back one day.